In a surprising move, it seems that the much anticipated Grey Zone Warfare from Madfinger Games is releasing as an early access title on Steam on April the 30th, which, as I sit here recording this, is today. So I'll be honest, I had other plans for today in terms of making content, but I think it's important that we pivot and take a look at the system requirements that are now available and break it down a bit, as I think there's going to be a lot of people that want to play this game. First things first, we need to acknowledge that this is an Unreal Engine 5 game, so don't expect this to be a walk in the park for your system. And also keep in mind that this is releasing as an early access title, so it's quite possible that the game will become more optimized over time. But for right now, we have the minimum and the recommended system requirements from Madfinger Games, so let's jump in and break it down. Let's get started with the CPU requirements. For the minimum requirement, they are recommending the Intel Core i5-8600 and the AMD Ryzen 5 2600X. Both of these chips are from 2018, so they're getting on for 6 years old now. The 8600 from Intel is a 6-core 6-thread CPU, so no multi-threading here, whereas the 2600X is a 6-core 12-thread CPU. Of course, what's unclear from the system requirements is what level of performance we can expect when using these processors. I would hope that, given the nature of the game, i.e. a twitchy first-person shooter, that these chips will be able to achieve at least 60 FPS, even if that means cranking down a few settings. Moving on up to the recommended system requirements, and we now have the Intel Core i7-9700K and the AMD Ryzen 5 3600X. So from Intel, we've got an 8-core 8-thread part, and we have a 6-core 12-thread part from AMD. Both the minimum and the recommended CPU requirements don't seem particularly high. We're not seeing any Zen 3 parts here, not to mention Zen 4, and the newest we're seeing from Intel is a 9th Gen i7. So either these system requirements are targeting relatively modest frame rates, or this game is likely to be limited by your GPU, making CPU less of a concern. Of course, we won't know until we get the game ourselves, hopefully later today, and we'll see for ourselves. If you were able to take part in the playtest, I'd love to hear what your experience was like in terms of performance. Leave us a comment. It'd be great to hear from you. Unfortunately, I did not have the opportunity to take part in the playtest, so I will have to wait until hopefully a little bit later today before I start throwing my own hardware at it. Looking at the RAM requirements, and you'll see no mention of 8GB here. This is a minimum of 16GB, and they're recommending 32. I'll be interested to see how much more than 16 gets used if you were to run it in a 32GB rig, but ultimately RAM prices are pretty reasonable at the moment. So if you're building a new rig, I'd find it hard to not put 32 in it. I mean, if budget is a concern, go for 16, but make sure you're getting yourself a motherboard that has capacity to go up to 32. This is an Unreal Engine 5 game, and as more Unreal Engine 5 games start getting released and, games in general keep evolving, there's only one way system requirements and RAM requirements are going to go, and, that is up. Just to quickly touch on storage, it only requires 40 gig according to the system requirements, which surprised me. Call of Duty, take note. Although there's no mention of whether this requires an SSD or not, but to be perfectly honest, this is an Unreal Engine 5 game, an open world one, no less, so for goodness sake, put it on an SSD. Alrighty, last but not least, let's look at the GPU requirements. On the minimum requirements, they are suggesting 3 cards. We've got the GTX 1080 from NVIDIA, an RX 5700 from AMD, and the Intel Arc A770. Good to see Intel getting a shout in here. Weirdly, looking at the relative performance of these cards on Tech Power Up, you can see that the 1080 and the 5700 are very, very close to one another. But look at that Intel Arc A770. That is a whopping 29% faster than the 1080 on Tech Power Up, of course. When looking at data like this, you've got to take it with a pinch or maybe even a handful of salt. But I do think it's handy just to give you some round numbers at a glance, and you can also get a sense of what other cards might fit the bill that weren't mentioned in the system requirements. So looking at the 1080 in a little bit more detail, you can see that it is an 8GB card. So other similarly powered 8GB cards could be in with a shout here. And again, thanks to the relative performance index on Tech Power Up, you can see that cards like the 2070 and the RX 6600 from AMD could be viable alternatives. Tech Power Up even have the 2060 above the 1080 in terms of performance, but that card only has 6 gig of RAM, so that could potentially be its undoing. Although the 2060 topped the Steam hardware charts for years, so there's likely going to be a lot of people that are going to try and play Greyzone Warfare with the 2060. And if that's you, let me know. Leave us a comment. Let me know how you got on. I'm sure me and a lot of other people in the comments would love to hear your experience. Moving up to the recommended GPU requirements, and we have the 3070 Ti from NVIDIA and the RX 6800 from AMD, not the 6800 XT, just the 6800. While the 6800 from AMD is a 16GB card, the 3070 Ti is still only an 8GB card. So it seems that 8GB cards aren't dead after all, despite all the hoo-ha from a few months ago. Of course, these recommended specs are all well and good, but we still don't really have a sense of the level of performance we can expect from a system that has the recommended system specifications. But if we look at cards that are in and around the recommended requirements, we do have quite a lot of choice at this level. If we look at similar cards to those that are recommended, we've got the vanilla 3070, which isn't a million miles off of the 3070 Ti, and it's a card that I own. So we'll be doing some testing on that card once the game is out, hopefully later today. Also from the 3070, the 2080 Ti isn't that far off either, and nor is the 4060 Ti. The 7700 XT could be another option from AMD, also so could the 4070 and even the 3080. The 4070 is priced quite aggressively at the moment due to the release of the 4070 Super, so you might be able to get a deal on one of those. And keep in mind the 3080 can be picked up on the used market at a really great price at the moment, which is crazy when you think about how in demand they were and what they were selling for really not that long ago now. So I think you've got some good options across the board, both on the new and the used market, if you're looking to upgrade your GPU to play this game. Or maybe you've already got the part and you can be rest assured you should get a fairly good experience. As for me, I've got two systems on the go here. I've got my main gaming PC, which has a 5800X3D in it with a 4080 Super with 32GB of RAM, and my streaming PC has a 5600X with a 3070 in it with 16GB of RAM. So I'll be keen to do some testing with various combinations of these bits of kit to see what Greyzone's performance is like in the real world. Of course, it'll be early days as the game will be released in early access mode. So like we said earlier, it wouldn't shock me if the game becomes more optimized over time. Let me know in the comments if you're considering picking up Greyzone in early access. It is always a bit of a risk going for early access, but the devs have been giving me good vibes throughout the playtest with their transparency and ability to execute. So I think I'll be giving it a go. I think it's good for the channel as well. So that's kind of the main reason for me. If you're going to be playing as well, leave us a comment. Let me know what you're going to be playing on, or maybe what you're planning to be playing on. I'd love to hear from you. But I'm going to wrap this one up. If you're not already, get subbed to the channel for more content. I'm going to be looking forward to testing out Greyzone Warfare to see what an open world shooter on the Unreal Engine 5 plays like on all the different bits of hardware I have here. So until next time, folks, take the very best care of yourselves. Ring the bell, subscribe, like all that good YouTube stuff, and I'll see you in the next video.